Come back, or I'll make sure that man loses everything, and his little girl won't have a father to come home to. This is your choice, not his.
The rain was cold the night Desmond Avery found her. She sat on the wet pavement outside his building, a suitcase thrown into a puddle, her wrist ringed red, where someone had grabbed too hard. Her husband had brought another woman home that evening, pushed divorce papers across the table, and when Corinne refused to sign, he said one thing before locking her out. "You don't have anything outside the name I gave you. Walk out and see how long you last." Desmond let her stay the night. One night. That was all he promised. By morning, her husband was outside with flowers on his knees in front of the whole building before pulling her close and whispering, "Come back, or I'll make sure that man loses everything, and his little girl won't have a father to come home to." Corinne looked at Desmond. He wasn't afraid, and he wasn't deciding for her. He said, "This is your choice, not his." Did Desmond open his door to the wrong woman, or to exactly the right person? Before we go any further, if you're new here, this channel tells stories about real people making hard choices in quiet moments that don't make the news. Stories about single fathers, about women starting over, about families that get built in ways nobody planned. If that's the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. It takes 2 seconds, and it means a lot. Now, let's get back to Desmond Corinne and the night that changed everything. Desmond Avery had lived in the same building for 11 years, first with his wife, then without her. The Caldwell Arms was not a place people chose, so much as a place they ended up. Narrow hallways, pipes that groaned in winter, a parking lot with more potholes than spaces. Desmond managed maintenance for the building and did it well, which was the reason the landlord kept the rent reasonable. He fixed what broke, showed up when people called, and kept every system running on a schedule that let him pick up extra work in the evenings. That was the life he had built after everything else fell apart, and most days it was enough. His daughter was 13 and sharp in the way children who grow up early tend to be. Tessa could read a room faster than most adults, and she had spent 3 years doing exactly that, watching every space her father entered, looking for signs that something was about to change. She did not want anything to change. She remembered her mother the way children remember someone they are terrified of forgetting, by holding very still, by keeping everything exactly as it was. The mug her mother used still sat on the second shelf. The jacket still hung by the door. Desmond had never asked her to move either one. The only person outside of Tessa that Desmond truly talked to was Reed Calloway. They had known each other since they were teenagers, and Reed now worked as a freelance painter picking up jobs across the city. He came by the Caldwell Arms several times a month to help move something heavy, to eat whatever was in the refrigerator, to sit on the back steps and say very little in a way that passed for real conversation between old friends. Reed had offered more than once to help Desmond clear out the storage closet where his wife's belongings still sat in sealed boxes. Desmond always said no, not because he wanted to preserve the objects inside, but because opening that closet meant admitting something he was not ready to admit. On the 3rd floor, Janice Porter had occupied Unit 3B for over 20 years. She was blunt the way people who have seen a great deal of life tend to be, not unkind, but unwilling to soften things that didn't deserve it. She helped watch Tessa on evenings when Desmond worked late, and she was the person he trusted most in the building, which was not something he said aloud, but something Janice already understood. She had watched marriages collapse in this building, watched men become unrecognizable under pressure, and women stay long past the point when staying made any sense. She did not romanticize any of it. Across the city, in a house that looked nothing like the Caldwell Arms Corinne Lawson had spent 7 years becoming smaller, she had married Gavin Rourke believing that love was supposed to feel like safety, and for a short while, it had. But Gavin's version of safety came with conditions. He chose what she wore, monitored her friendships, and had a justification for every restriction that always began with, "I just want to protect you." When Corinne pushed back, Gavin didn't raise his hand. He went silent for days, or he broke something, or he explained patiently, reasonably, that she was being too sensitive, that no one else would handle her the way he did. After enough years, Corinne had stopped pushing back. She had stopped trusting her own read on things. She had become, without fully realizing it, a woman who asked permission for things she used to do without a second thought. It was their wedding anniversary when Gavin came home with someone else. Corinne had cooked and set the table the way Gavin preferred, candles-scented cloth napkins, the good dishes brought out from the cabinet he said was reserved for special occasions. She heard his key in the lock at 7:30 and felt the particular relief she had trained herself to feel when he arrived on time and in a predictable mood. That relief lasted until the door swung open and a woman walked in behind him. Gavin did not explain. He looked at the table, looked at Corinne, and said the marriage was over. He set a folder of papers on the counter, divorce documents already prepared. When Corinne didn't move, he told her it didn't matter either way, because the house was in his name, the car was in his name, and the accounts were structured so that she had access to almost nothing on her own. He told her the people who knew them, their neighbors, their mutual friends, his colleagues saw a generous and patient man married to a woman who was, as he put it, not entirely stable. If she chose to fight, he said, she already knew how that story would be told. Corinne tried to call her sister. She had taken 2 steps toward her phone when Gavin crossed the room and took it from her hand. When she reached for it, he caught her wrist, not a slap, not a blow, just a grip that tightened until she stopped pulling. Then he picked up the suitcase he had already packed for her and threw it out the front door. He told her to leave. He told her she would come back. He said it the way a person says something they have already decided is settled. She walked out into the evening without knowing where she was going. The rain came an hour later. She moved through streets that grew less familiar the longer she walked, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a wrist that had started to swell. By the time her legs stopped, she was standing in front of a building she had never seen, on a block she could not have named, with no clear understanding of how she had ended up there. The hallway light of the Caldwell Arms was still on. That was the only reason she sat down on the front step instead of continuing to walk. Desmond found her 20 minutes later coming outside to check a pipe that had been reporting low pressure all week. He almost walked past before he registered what he was seeing, a woman sitting in the rain, a soaked suitcase beside her. The kind of stillness that follows something that has already happened. He crouched down and asked if she was all right, which was not exactly the right question, but was the one he had. Corinne told him not to call the police. She said her husband had connections and would find a way to frame her as the problem. She said it evenly, which told Desmond more than the evenness was meant to. He looked at her wrist for a moment, then stood up. He said she could sleep on the couch. One night. In the morning, they would work out the rest. Gavin arrived at 8 the next morning. Desmond heard the car before he saw it, a door closing with too much care, footsteps that slowed as they approached the building. By the time he stepped outside, Gavin Rourke was already in the courtyard with a bouquet of flowers and a face arranged into something that looked like grief. He was well-dressed and composed, and he had timed his arrival for the hour when enough residents would be leaving for work to give him an audience. He went down on one knee. He said Corinne's name. He said last night had been a terrible mistake, that the woman she had seen was a colleague and nothing more, that he had handled everything badly and knew it. His voice broke in the right places. He held out one hand and kept it open, patient, like a man who understood he had to wait to be forgiven. Janice stood on the second-floor walkway with her arms crossed and said nothing. She had seen this kind of performance before, the well-timed tears, the public gesture, the story that rewrote itself overnight. She was waiting for the part that always came next. Corinne stepped outside. She hadn't slept. She stood at the edge of the courtyard and looked at her husband and Desmond, watched something shift in her expression, the pull of a pattern practiced so many times it no longer needed thought. When Gavin stood and opened his arms, Corinne moved toward him. He held her long enough for the gesture to look tender, then lowered his head close to her ear. Whatever he said, Desmond could not hear it, but he saw the color leave Corinne's face. She pulled back from Gavin and turned toward Desmond with an expression that was entirely apology. She was preparing to leave. Not because she wanted to, but because Gavin had just handed her a reason to believe that staying would cost Desmond and Tessa something they couldn't recover from. Desmond walked across the courtyard. He didn't address Gavin. He told Corinne calmly and without pressure that she did not need to make any decision right now, not while someone was standing next to her, laying out the consequences. He said she was welcome to stay at the Caldwell Arms until she felt safe enough to choose for herself. Then he waited. Gavin's expression held, but something behind it shifted. Corinne looked at her husband, then back at Desmond. She thought about the apologies she had accepted before and what had followed each one. She thought about the suitcase that had been packed before she even knew the night was going to go this way. She told Gavin she was not leaving with him. Corinne stayed. That was the simple version. The more complicated version was that she stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment that barely fit Desmond, and Tessa slept on a couch that was too short for her and woke each morning to a 13-year-old who looked at her like a problem that had not yet been fully assessed. Tessa was not cruel. She was careful, which was sometimes worse. She answered Corinne's questions with exactly as many words as required, cleared her own dishes before Corinne could offer to help, and made herself scarce in the particular way children make themselves scarce when they want an adult to understand something without having to say it aloud. What Tessa wanted Corinne to understand was that this apartment had a system, and the system had been working, and Corinne's presence was a variable nobody had asked for. Desmond did not push either of them toward each other. He treated the situation practically. He asked Janice to put together what she knew about women's shelters, part-time work, and support groups for people leaving controlling relationships. Janice did this without ceremony, handing him a folded piece of paper 2 days later with a short list and no editorial comment. She had seen enough situations like this to know that what Corinne needed was options, not comfort. What Corinne found when she tried to act on any of those options was how thoroughly 7 years of Gavin had dismantled her practical life. She didn't know the bus routes in this part of the city. She couldn't remember the passwords to accounts she hadn't been allowed to manage. She flinched when her phone rang, even after Desmond had helped her get a new number, because Gavin found new numbers. He sent messages in batches, 5 from one number, 3 from another. The tone shifted with each cluster. One set was apologetic, full of the language he used when he was working towards something. The next accused her of selfishness. The third arrived late at night and contained photographs, the two of them at her sister's wedding, a vacation they had taken the 2nd year of their marriage, a birthday dinner in a restaurant she had loved. Beneath the last photo, he wrote that no one would ever know her the way he did, that no one else would have the patience for what she was. Corinne read them in the bathroom with the door closed, and Desmond knew she was reading them because she came out quieter each time and spent the rest of the evening arguing with herself in the way people argue when they are trying to stop believing something they already know is true. He didn't tell her to block the number. He didn't take her phone. One evening, when she had gone quiet, in the way that meant she was losing ground, Desmond looked up from what he was doing and asked her one question. He said, "If someone loves you, why are you always afraid of them?" Corinne didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The call came on a Wednesday. Corinne's phone lit up after 10 in the evening, a number she didn't recognize, which meant Gavin was on his 3rd or 4th rotation of new lines. She answered because she had learned that not answering did not stop the calls, it only changed what they contained. Gavin's voice was low and uneven, in a way she had heard before. He said he had taken something. He said he didn't know how much. He said if she wasn't standing in the kitchen of their house within 40 minutes, whatever happened next was on her. Corinne stood up. She had her shoes on before Desmond came out of his room. He heard enough to understand the situation in under a minute. He took her phone, got the address, and called emergency services before she reached the door. She tried to get past him. He stepped aside. He did not physically stop her, but he said very quietly that she should wait 15 minutes before making any decision. 15 minutes later, a neighbor sent Corinne a text. Paramedics had arrived at the house, and Gavin had met them at the door without assistance. He was unhurt. He had declined further evaluation. He had apparently mentioned that his wife was emotionally volatile and had recently left their home without warning. Corinne sat back down on the couch. She did not cry immediately. She sat very still the way she did when she was reconstructing something, sorting through the timeline, testing the sequence against everything she understood about Gavin and finding that it fit perfectly. He hadn't miscalculated. He had known exactly what the call would do to her, had known she would move toward the door, and had been waiting to see whether her guilt was still strong enough to override her judgment. Tonight, it had almost been. Desmond sat across from her and let the silence hold for a while. Then he told her something he had not told many people. He said that after his wife died, he kept the apartment exactly as it had been, her things on the shelves, her coat by the door, her handwriting still on the grocery list pinned to the refrigerator. He said Reed had offered a dozen times to come over and help him rearrange, and each time Desmond had said no. Not because he needed the objects, but because he had convinced himself that moving anything forward was a form of erasure, that the only way to honor what had been was to leave everything exactly where it had fallen. He said he understood the instinct to protect something that no longer existed in the form you needed it to. Corinne looked at him for a long moment. She said she kept thinking that the Gavin from the early years was still in there, that if she could find the right combination of patience and restraint, she could get back to that version. Desmond said he understood that too. He also said the difference between what he was describing and what she was living was that grief could not follow you around making threats. That night, after Desmond went back to his room, Corinne sat in the kitchen while Tessa finished homework at the table. They didn't talk much, but when Tessa got up to leave, she paused and told Corinne which cabinet had the extra blankets because the couch got cold toward morning. It was not forgiveness, but it was something. Gavin shifted tactics. The first move came without warning. Corinne had spent a week preparing for a part-time position at a dry cleaner 3 bus stops away. She had pressed her clothes the night before, rehearsed what she would say, arranged her schedule around the shift hours. When she arrived for her first day, the manager met her at the door and said the position had been filled. He was polite about it. He would not meet her eyes. Later, someone at the front counter said a man had come in 2 days prior asking about a new hire named Corinne and mentioning in the course of a friendly conversation that she had been dealing with some significant mental health difficulties. Corinne came back to the Caldwell Arms and sat in the stairwell for a long time before going upstairs. The second move was slower and more deliberate. Stories circulated in the building Desmond wasn't sure of the source, but the content was clear enough that he was harboring a married woman, that the situation was not as straightforward as it appeared, that a man in his position should be more careful about who he brought around his daughter. One of the older tenants stopped returning Desmond's greetings. Another asked with exaggerated concern how Tessa was handling the changes at home. Reed told him to let it go. He said people who needed to believe Gavin's version of events would believe it regardless, and the ones who mattered already knew Desmond well enough to wait for more information. Desmond heard this and knew it was reasonable, but reasonableness does not make a thing easier to absorb. Then Gavin went to Tessa's school. He arrived during lunch, introduced himself to the front office as a concerned family friend, and expressed worry, again politely, with what appeared to be genuine distress about the living conditions at the Caldwell Arms. He used the word unstable twice. He asked whether the school had any resources for children experiencing disruption in the home. By the following afternoon, 2 of Tessa's friends had heard a version of this from older siblings. Tessa came home quieter than usual and went to her room. That evening, when Corinne asked if she wanted help with the math assignment she had been working on, Tessa turned in her chair and said with a precision that only comes from having thought something through carefully, that life in this apartment had been fine before Corinne arrived, and that nothing that had happened since was an improvement. Corinne did not respond. She went to the kitchen, washed the cup she had been using, and set it on the drying rack. That night, she folded her clothes and repacked them into the suitcase. In the morning, before Desmond or Tessa were awake, she wrote a note and left it on the counter. She thanked him. She said she would not let Gavin use her presence to damage what Desmond had built. She said she was not going back to her husband. Then she walked to the Women's Center on Merritt Avenue and asked about intake. When Desmond woke up, the couch was folded and the blanket was stacked in a neat square on the cushion. He read the note twice. Then he sat down and did not move for several minutes. He had told himself from the beginning that the practical goal was to help Corinne reach a stable position. She had a roof. She was looking for work. He had kept appropriate distance. Everything had been handled correctly. He sat there understanding all of that and still finding the apartment wrong in a way that had nothing to do with logic. Tessa found the note when she came out for breakfast. She read it without being invited to, then set it back on the counter and went to get her backpack. At the door, she stopped, and without turning around, she said she hadn't meant what she said the night before. Or she had meant it, but she'd been wrong. She left before Desmond could answer. That afternoon, Janice came downstairs and knocked. She told Desmond where the Merritt Avenue Center was in case he found the information useful. She said this without elaboration and went back upstairs. 3 days later, Gavin went to the center. Corinne had not told anyone outside the building where she was going, but Gavin had resources that didn't require her cooperation. He had tracked the number she used to call the center the morning she left, cross-referenced it against a directory, and arrived at Merritt Avenue the same way he had always operated, methodically, without apparent urgency, as though patience were a virtue rather than a strategy. He did not ask to see her. He waited in the parking lot at shift change when foot traffic made it harder for staff to monitor, and when she came out, he fell into step beside her, as though they had planned to meet. He told her she had made her point. He said he respected her for it. Then he told her what came next. She would come home, resume her life as it had been, and he would withdraw from every threat he had made. Desmond would keep his job, Tessa would be left alone, and Corinne would continue to have access to the material stability she had no way of replicating on her own. The alternative, he said, was that he continued methodically, without anger, to make things difficult for everyone she had decided to place above her own common sense. He spoke without raising his voice. Corinne thought about Desmond, about Tessa's school, about the job that had already been taken from her before she started. She thought about the fact that she had been at the center less than a week and already felt herself running out of arguments. She was about to say yes when she heard a familiar truck pull into the lot. Desmond stepped out. Behind him, Tessa closed the passenger door. They were not there to confront anyone. They were there because Desmond had spent 3 days with an empty apartment and made a simple decision he was not going to let her face this moment without knowing someone was present who was not Gavin. Corinne looked at Gavin's outstretched hand and did not take it. She had replayed this moment in different forms for 7 years. The version where she finally said the right thing, found the right tone, managed to communicate something to him that landed. She had spent years believing the problem was her delivery, her timing, her inability to make him understand. Standing in the parking lot of the Merritt Avenue Center with Desmond and Tessa 20 feet behind her, she understood for the first time that there was nothing to communicate. Gavin already knew everything he needed to know about their marriage. He had simply decided that what he knew gave him the right to continue. She said the marriage was over. She did not apologize for the disruption. She did not acknowledge the years in the way he would have wanted her to. She said it plainly, the marriage had been over for a long time, not because of another woman or a single night, but because Gavin had looked at love and decided it was an instrument, and she could not spend the rest of her life being played. Gavin's expression did not shift immediately. He was practiced enough to absorb a setback without broadcasting it. Then, when it became clear she had already given her answer, his hand came forward and closed around her wrist. It was not a violent grip. It was the grip of a man who had never needed violence to communicate ownership. Someone who had spent years teaching her that resistance was futile, that the line between her choice and his instruction had been blurred so gradually she might not even see it anymore. He began to walk. He assumed motion would solve the problem in the way motion had always solved it before. Desmond stepped forward. He did not throw a punch. He simply moved to stand in Gavin's path, and the quality of his presence, still unhurried, entirely certain, made Gavin stop. In the same moment, 2 staff members from the center came out the side entrance. A woman walking past had already pulled out her phone. Gavin looked around and found that the familiar architecture of his control, the closed door, the private room, the witness who could be managed, was entirely absent. What surrounded him instead were strangers with no stake in maintaining his version of events. He released Corinne's wrist. Gavin straightened, adjusted his jacket, and walked to his car at the same careful pace he had maintained throughout. But Corinne watched him go and saw something she had not been able to see from inside their house. From inside all those years, she saw a man managing his own panic. The composed exit was not confidence, it was damage control. The man who had told her she couldn't survive without him had driven to a women's center in the middle of a workday to retrieve her compliance. That was not power. That was desperation wearing a familiar mask. She filed for a protective order the following morning. The center helped her locate an attorney who handled the paperwork at reduced cost. Within a week, the order was in place. Within 10 days, she had begun the formal divorce process. That same week, Desmond called Reed and told him to come over on Saturday. When Reed arrived, Desmond opened the storage closet for the first time in 3 years. They didn't say much while they worked. They moved the boxes carefully, set aside what Desmond wanted to keep, and made space for what came next. Tessa sat in the hallway and watched. At one point, she asked if she could keep her mother's green scarf. Desmond said yes without hesitating. The flower shop was called Greer's, and it occupied the ground floor of a narrow building 2 blocks from the transit station on Aldwell Street. Corinne had walked past it 3 times before she went inside. The woman who owned it, Patricia Greer, was in her 60s and ran the operation with the efficiency of someone who had stopped tolerating waste decades ago. She needed help with deliveries and basic arrangement prep. She was not looking for a creative partner. She was looking for someone who showed up when they said they would and handled the product carefully. Corinne showed up. She handled the product carefully. The first 2 weeks were simple and physical unloading, stock, stripping lower leaves, filling buckets, learning which cooler held what and at what temperature. She was tired in the evenings in a way that was uncomplicated, and she discovered that uncomplicated exhaustion felt nothing like the exhaustion she had carried through the last years of her marriage. She slept without inventory. She woke without dread. By the 3rd week, Patricia had noticed that the arrangements Corinne prepped looked different from the standard templates. Not wrong, just considered as though someone had thought about proportion and light. Patricia handed Corinne the order sheet for a retirement luncheon and told her to see what she came up with. What Corinne came up with was warm and deliberate, and it made the woman being honored cry in a way she seemed grateful for. Patricia booked her for the next 3 events. Corinne found a room to rent 4 blocks from the Caldwell Arms. It was small, but every object in it was one she had selected or been given by someone who meant her well. She chose the color of the curtains. She bought a lamp at a second-hand shop not because it was practical, but because the shade was a particular amber she liked. These were not large decisions, but the accumulation of small decisions made by no one but herself, where she was learning its own kind of architecture. Desmond and Reed finalized the paperwork for their expanded business on a Thursday afternoon. The plan was straightforward. They would take on larger residential jobs together, with Reed handling paint and finish work, while Desmond covered structural and systems repairs. Reed had proposed this partnership 18 months earlier, and Desmond had found reasons to delay it each time. He didn't explain now why he was finally ready. Reed didn't ask. Corinne helped them put together a single-page flyer. Desmond picked the second version, Reed picked the third, and was overruled. Tessa, who had been watching from the hallway with studied disinterest, said the second one was clearly the right choice, and went back to her room. Janice came by one Tuesday evening with rice beans and a bottle of hot sauce she said Corinne probably needed. They sat together in the common room while the light came through the window at a low angle. Janice did not say anything comforting. She said that in 22 years at the Caldwell Arms, she had watched many women in circumstances like Corinne's. Some had gone back. She understood why each one had, and she didn't judge any of them for it. But the ones who found their way out, she said the turning point was never the dramatic moment it looked like from the outside. It was always something smaller, one decision made alone and followed through. She said Corinne had already made that decision. She said now it was just the work. Tessa asked for Corinne's help in late September, a text brief and carefully punctuated asking about flowers for her mother's anniversary. They spent a Saturday morning at Greer's choosing together. At the cemetery, Corinne stood a few steps back, while Desmond and Tessa played. Tessa asked for Corinne's help in late September, a text brief and carefully punctuated asking about flowers for her mother's anniversary. They spent a Saturday morning at Greer's choosing together. At the cemetery, Corinne stood a few steps back while Desmond and Tessa placed the arrangement. On the drive home, Tessa said quietly that her mother would have liked the coral roses. Nobody responded, which was the right response. Gavin sent a final letter in October through her attorney's address. It ran 2 pages, self-justifying, assured of its own logic, ending with the prediction that Corinne would regret everything she had chosen. Corinne read both pages, then brought the letter to her attorney and let it become part of the file. She did not need to destroy it. She did not need Desmond to see it. She simply handed it to the person whose job it was to handle such things and walked back out into the afternoon. The light above the kitchen sink in Corinne's rental had been flickering for 2 weeks before she mentioned it to Desmond, and she mentioned it only because he happened to ask whether the building's wiring gave her any trouble, and she could not think of a reason to withhold a direct answer to a direct question. He came by on a Friday evening with his kit bag over one shoulder. The repair took under half an hour. It was a loose connection behind the fixture panel, the kind of thing that compounds if ignored and clears up immediately once someone with the right tools takes 20 minutes to address it. Desmond worked without commentary. Corinne made coffee and set a cup on the counter within his reach, and they moved around each other in the small kitchen with a familiarity that neither of them had named yet, but that both of them recognized. When he came down from the step stool and put the panel cover back in place, the light held steady. He washed his hands and began packing his bag. The rain that had started an hour earlier was heavier now, moving against the single window in a way that made the glass sound like it was being tested. Corinne stood with her coffee and looked at the lamp she had bought at the second-hand shop, at the curtains she had chosen herself, at the arrangement of objects that added up to a life that was entirely hers. Then she looked at Desmond, who was checking the latch on his kit bag in the way he always did before leaving a job. She told him to wait. She said that the night he opened his door, she had not been capable of understanding what she was being given. She had been too depleted, too thoroughly convinced of her own inadequacy to receive much of anything. But in the months that followed, she had come to understand something she had not previously had a reference point for. She said he had shown her that a man could be strong without needing to prove it against someone else's weakness, that he could protect without requiring possession in return, that he could offer care without attaching a price that would come due later. She said she had spent 7 years learning what love looked like when it was being misused. She had needed to see the other version before she could believe it existed. Desmond set down his bag. He said she had changed something in him, too. After his wife died, he had made a private agreement with himself that moving forward meant letting go of her, and that he couldn't do the second thing, so he had stopped doing the first. He had kept everything in place, her objects, her routines, as though stillness were the same thing as faithfulness. What Corinne had done without intending to do anything except survive her own situation was show him that people did not stop loving the dead when they returned to living. They only became capable of holding both. Corinne said she was not ready to be anyone's partner in the full sense of the word yet. She had a room she was still arranging, a self she was still in the process of recovering, but she was ready for a normal evening with someone she had chosen to be near. Desmond pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. A year later, Corinne moved into the Caldwell Arms, not because circumstances made it practical. She moved in because all 3 of them had spent a year learning each other's schedules and tolerances and silences, and at the end of that year, Tessa said with the directness of someone who had thought it through completely, "I think you should just live here." It was not a request. It was an assessment. Reed helped with the move and complained about the bookshelf for all 3 flights of stairs, then immediately asked if there was anything else that needed relocating because he was already there. Janice came by that evening with a casserole, said the apartment looked better with more books in it, and went back upstairs. On the wall above the dining table, the photograph of Desmond's wife remained where it had always been. Beside it, in a simple frame Tessa had chosen, was a photograph taken the morning Greer's reopened under its new name, with Corinne as co-owner, Desmond with his hands in his jacket pockets, Tessa holding an oversized arrangement of coral roses, and Corinne standing in the doorway with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they intended to reach. That Friday evening, the four of them ate dinner in the kitchen while the rain moved against the windows. Tessa glanced toward the door and said maybe they should check if anyone was sitting outside. Desmond said they were not doing that again. Corinne told him they absolutely might. Reed asked what he had missed, and nobody explained. There's a version of this story that ends the night Desmond found Corinne in the rain. A man makes a kind choice, a woman finds safety, and everyone moves on. But that's not what happened here. What happened was slower and harder and more real than that, two people unlearning the damage that had been done to them and choosing gradually and without guarantee to try again. Love that is real doesn't ask you to disappear inside it. It gives you enough room to find out who you are. If that message reached you today, if some part of this story sat with you in a way you're still turning over, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. There are more stories like this one waiting, and we'd love for you to be here for them.